Hello, Alfie.
Hello, Freddie.
Happy Sunday.
Yes, I'm knackered.
Yeah, I know. It's been a tiring week.
Yeah,
We'll have a relaxing one today, I think.
well, me and Alan had this very long podcast talk on our other link, Creativity and Madness, where basically we're talking about euthanasia
Oh, heck.
and the Nazis.
Okay. Right. Okay.
And it's been a heavy week.
Well, I tell you,
studying that.
we should have a gentle, more fun conversation.
Yeah, we'd have a sort of laid back.
Tell me some stories or something.
Yes. Yeah, but what we was the other day we was talking about something.
We were.
Do you remember what we was talking? Sorry about this, folks, but this is what happens sometimes.
Into it. I was talking about this difference between the wartime generation and their kind of stoic, austere, sort of correctitude of that culture, the culture that went to war and was strong, and how that affected and came out in the post-war generations, the boomer generations culture, because we've been talking about that.
Yeah,
the mods and the Who and all this stuff, and that expression of sort of freedom and Woodstock and all those.
Yeah, I think
cultural freedoms and the difference between the two generations.
What we touched upon, wasn't it, on our relaxing conversation the other day was, I mean, this is literally what I remember about my father and his generation in and around King's Cross, who went to war, the Second World War. They must have seen, I know my dad was, I think he was the second lot who landed in Normandy.
Right.
But for a kid growing up in that atmosphere, which we'll get back to in a moment, we didn't have a clue what happened. There was a silence, and I think what we're talking about as well is that after the war, Attlee, who was the Labour Prime Minister, he was before the war, he was called in by Churchill to help booster his political struggle that he was having against the appeasers to Hitler, who were the sort of ex-electors of the Tory party. The reason Churchill brought in Attlee, one, because Attlee was a general. He was one of the last officers to leave the shores of Gallipoli. So he knew his stuff when it came to war. And Churchill also knew that Labour was far more anti-appeasement than a large section of his own party. Now, Attlee has almost been written out of history, actually. You know, people see Attlee as this dull, plodding man. But after the war, Labour pulled off this stunning victory over the Tories, and that is far more complex, like that old generation that came after the war. One, he brought in the welfare state when there was severe austerity, because Britain, in terms of economics, came out worse after the war. But not only did Attlee bring in the welfare state, he also brought in nuclear warheads.
Right.
Much against the so-called left of the Labour Party.
Yes.
But the thing about Britain with its nuclear warheads, We haven't got a lot, and we can't use them without America saying so, because they belong to America. They don't belong to us. You know, we can't suddenly turn around and say, "Oh, we have a war, so we get send out nuclear warheads." It doesn't work like that. But Attlee was juggling the welfare state, nuclear warheads, and austerity. He had, you know, so it was a massive, great struggle he was going through. But the generation that went to war were quite silent about the war. I mean, there were the British Legion meeting around the cenotaph, and they were quite big gatherings of ex-soldiers. I think then it was men only, I think. But my father never took part in all that, even though part of that British Legion met outside where we lived in King's Cross on one of the hills. He wasn't bothered about it, never spoke about it. Like a lot of the men in and around King's Cross, they would never talk about the war. And the Poppy Day then, I think, was far more respectful than it is now. I think, you know,
it's a lot closer there.
It's a commercialisation of, I think, you know, it puts me off personally. But then there was a dignity about it. There was almost a silent dignity that was quite, even for us kids growing up, we knew something could happen. We were surrounded by ruins. We were surrounded by silence as well about, you know, we knew there had been a war, but what does that mean as a kid growing up? And, you know, even as kids, we knew that the Remembrance Day service was something quite important. You weren't, you know, you either wore a poppy or you didn't. It was that sort of thing. So it was far more, I won't say gentle. It was far more sort of quiet reflection, I think.
Well, because they're actually remembering. They're actually remembering fallen comrades,
yeah, it was far
fallen
more
friends. There's a direct link in the remembrance to actual people, whereas I suppose like people like now, you know, I remember my grandfather, but I only knew him as an old man, not as the young, you know, there's a remove.
Yeah.
And you know what they did, but we're removed from the actual conflict by 70 years now. You know, so.
Yeah, so you know that period straight after the war, I think it's far more interesting than it's given credit for in terms of memory, and in terms of, for me growing up, which I mentioned quite a lot, particularly amongst the ruins. You know, the bombs dropped near where my mother was living, because my dad was in the army. But we never told anything. We knew a war that happened. We knew that Germany had been beaten, and we knew we had this weapon that could probably blow the world up. So there was that sort of fantasy. But I think looking back as well, in terms of Britain and its place in the world, on one of the channels on TV, there's a very good repeat of a programme that was made in the 1970s, The World at War. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Narrated by Laurence Olivier.
Yeah.
And, you know, parts of it are absolutely brilliant. But at the end of it, there's this American professor of economics, and he said, well, the worst country, you know, Britain came out worse after the war. We didn't have a Marshall Plan like Europe.
Yeah,
we were still old.
Won the war, but didn't get as much of the aid.
Yeah. We were started to pay back the Americans of the land use thing. we were still holding onto an empire. The last chunk of it would soon disappear, and that would be India with its independence. But there was also something I think I mentioned this yesterday that I forgot all about. There was the Festival of Britain.
Yes.
On the South Bank, and I vaguely remember it.
When was that? What year was that?
I think about 1951, 1952. It went through. It was closed down by the Conservatives for some dubious reason. But what the festival was about, I mean, it was absolutely spectacular when you look at the old films, and it was about new technology. It was about Britain at the forefront of technology. We were still making things. And I'm beginning to wake up. We were still making things in Britain. And for a while, the aircraft industry, owned by Britain, led the world in aeroplane design. Only for a small time, but the plan was new technology, new ideas. There was slum clearancing going on, better housing started to come in. And slowly but surely a different confidence began to emerge. Right. That we'd gotten over the worst. And Churchill got back in, but he was into power, but he was completely doodaddled by then. So Anthony Eden came in, and he must have been exhausted. They must have been exhausted. They'd been through a bloody war. So it must have been, I mean, you could tell when you look at Eden now that he was pissed after some. I think most of them were.
Yeah,
how do you cope?
That's the amount of pressure. Well, this is the thing. How do you cope with that amount of pressure?
Yeah. Now, in
King's
Cross,
really and truly on your shoulders.
In King's Cross, when we do this walkabout, I'll point some places out. In the shortest distance possible, there were 5 pubs. Right?
Sounds like my kind of place, Alphie.
Yes, yeah. But, and as I think I mentioned, there were really strict rules in place. Pubs opened at, I think it was midday, and closed at 3 o'clock. And then they opened again at, I think it was about 6:30, and would close at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Which became a sort of drink culture, because you can imagine on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, particularly on Friday, the barman shouting out, "Last orders please, ladies and gentlemen," just before 10 o'clock when you had to close. So people just rushed to the bar and ordered whiskey, beer, and were doing chasers. Sorry, I still am tired. So that is, I mean, that old culture, we have to re-look at it, I think. Okay. Not now. Can you keep a memory of this? Because we can go. I think this is quite important. That pre-war culture, after-war culture, those years, up until Suez.
Yeah. So those sort of 7 years.
Yeah. Now, as you probably know, President Nasser of Egypt privatised the Suez Canal, and Britain and France sent in their troops to, well, kick Nasser out basically.
Keep it open, yeah.
It was Eisenhower turned around and said, "Get out. It's nothing to do with you." So we had to leave. But even the troops didn't know why they were there. Because nobody, it's the usual, what I go on about, nobody actually informed them while they were there. And if you look now at the newsreels of that period, when they got told by America to get out, the troops are singing, they're taking piss out of the government, basically, because they didn't want to go there. This was another one, it's not a bloody war. So it was a very slow decline, but it was a very gentle decline. And then you got Macmillan, who came into power, and the two slogans, "You've never had it so good." That might have been true.
Right. Yeah.
With all the slum clearances,
Major
everything.
enemy defeated,
Yeah, there was a major
slum clearance, rebuilding of houses, economy starting to get on its feet.
There was a consensus going on as well amongst the parties. So there wasn't this split between left and right. But also, Macmillan said there's winds of change flowing through the world, and he was talking mostly about Africa becoming, the independent nations. So there was a change of mood going on. Now, I'm still talking about growing up in all this. At the time, it wasn't, we moved from King's Cross into what we thought was a lovely flat, no outside toilet, bathroom, TV, we all had TV, we've been through how important all that was. So yes, there was an industry was making, British cars made by British companies and British firms. British industry offered apprenticeships to young people. That meant that you would go into an industry and you would learn a trade. For 4 years you would be in the industry, mostly building. In the south I think of a lot of it building, painting and decorating, plumbing and building, bricklaying were big industries. And again, we owned it, and you as a young person would go in and you get this apprenticeship, and it meant you was working around all sorts of different people, different age groups, adults, so you was learning. I'm smiling now. I couldn't bear it. My world was somewhere else. And my world was moving away from that world, but was becoming very individualistic.
Yes, yes, we've touched on this before.
A million miles away from our parents.
Yes.
And a lot of, the trade unions then, although they were powerful, they knew what they were about, and I'll come back to that later. But there were tiny splits beginning to occur within culture. So up until about, let's say 59, 60, everything was going relatively smoothly. And then we had, as we've spoken about, these other cultural things that came on, Lady Chatterley, satire, and the big thing, style.
Yes, yes.
Style. Particularly in the South, young people in my sort of world, for the first time ever, were earning, or we could earn, more than our parents.
Right. Yeah, that does seem to be an important distinction.
And another big one, and the restriction on drinking was still there.
Right.
But as I think I've mentioned before, my generation, i.e. the mod generation, individualistic, and we had money in our pockets. We had music that we could listen to, and we could go to clubs in the West End. And for the first time, I think in the whole history of this country, youth culture brought something in. Clubs didn't close, so you could go.
Very different to the pubs.
Yeah. So young people would go to say the mod club that you had to. If you was a mod, you had to be seen at the scene. in just off of Soho, off of Wardour Street. Opens at 10 at night, goes through till about 6 or 7 in the morning. Same with the Flamingo in Wardour Street. Opens at 6 o'clock at night, goes through to about 7 o'clock in the morning. Same on the Sunday. So for the first time ever, young people, not the massive generation of young people, but a large section of young people were going to nightclubs.
And that's
all
a totally
nightclubs.
Different rhythm.
Yeah, I don't think you would ever
drinking
find that.
and your partying and your
From that sort of Soho culture, what you had was an influx of art students, designers, entrepreneurs, all young, all individualistic, all had money, totally dominated by style. Hence Carnaby Street.
Yes, yeah, we spoke about that the other day.
Well, Carnaby Street quickly became a tourist attraction, but for a year it was at the forefront of the world, I think, in terms of fashion. You had Mary Quant, the woman style. You know, women were taking the pill. You had the miniskirt. There was a big focus on swinging London.
Yeah.
But swinging London was centred geographically all around the West End. Outside London, outside that tightly knit tribe, young people were still going to work. They were still on apprenticeships. They were still, following professions. And I mentioned before that lovely film, documentary, We Are the Lambeth Boys.
Yeah.
There you see it. And there you see these young people at work doing their different apprenticeships. But this entrepreneurial gathering, looking back on it, sadly, I think we're snobbish on that level. And then you had the docks that were still thriving, where goods were going in and out.
Coming through London, goods.
I would hate to be a docker because work wasn't guaranteed. But the River Thames was actually chock-a-block.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all.
If you look at the black,
now, but that was the whole.
And a lot of those flats are
built
built on
of the world's trade.
Yeah, and they're built on docks, old docks. And the biggest one, which is on the north side, just by Tower Bridge, was St Catherine Dock. It got burned down.
Oh, right.
There's a big scandal about this. Developers started to move in. Now, with the developers came the East End bloody gangsters. Not the Crays, but the Richardsons, who were far more. Do you know about the Richardsons?
Not massively, no.
Oh, bloody hell, man. They were far more savvy, business-wise. They thought the Cray twins were just wankers, because they was getting their pictures. Sorry to swear, folks, they was getting their pictures taken. The Richardsons were out-and-out gangsters. They were businessmen. They come from that sort of old style that came out of the Second World War. I could go on all day about this.
Yeah.
And they dressed in style.
Sorry.
They dressed within style. They had real strict working class rules and regulations. And they were vicious. I mean, really vicious. I don't know if you've seen that film with, anyway, no, it'll come to me. But they moved in with the developers. So a developer, you want something done, right? Behind the back door. Who'd you go to? Not the the craze, who even to us mods were idiots
Right.
because they were too violent.
Right.
I mean, the Richardsons were violent, but they knew how to do it. You know, they would hang you upside down in a freezing lorry and stuff like that. But you know, that's okay. So you know, the Richardsons were sort of on the side of burning down buildings for a whopping great chunk of money. And I forget his name now. When the eldest Richardson brother, when they got busted, went to prison. When he came out, he became a very successful businessman.
Right.
Legally, a businessman. But what he said was that there's more criminals from Eton College working in the city.
It's just a different
Yeah,
kind
so,
of crime.
you know,
and a different
so you had
kind of
this
backhander and a different kind of way to
I
make
don't know
them
where
work
this is
world
going,
move, isn't it?
but it's part of a world that we don't really talk about.
No.
You see it on documentaries, you see it, you can get books about it, but it's all separate. They're like separate entities. You know, you read about the craze, and I don't read about the craze, but it was a separate entity. You read about the Richardsons, or you find out about them, separate entity. But it wasn't. It was all together. It was all part of the change that was going on, and you know, we need to keep that in our minds. So back to the war. Sorry to leap about now. Back to the Second World War in Soho. I forget, it wasn't the Sabrinas. Billy Hill was the first English modern gangster
Right.
from the East End.
Okay.
And he began to.
When roughly is that then?
This would be in the Second World War, just before the Second World War
right, so
started.
it's a spiff type thing.
Yeah. So when the bombs dropped and the blackouts happened, he made that boast. Hitler was our best friend because there was a blackout.
So he could move about.
But
the
again, he
city
was a
being
businessman.
Criminal. Yeah. Well,
He was a really shrewd
this is always
businessman.
how it's painted.
And he led the
how
way
they
in
think of
bankrupt
themselves.
in robbing post offices and all that. So if you bring all this in, the image, and I'm talking about Southern England now, unfortunately, the image of what happened after the war begins to change, I think, when we take on board all these different social and cultural events going on.
Yeah.
Now, I remember, you know, and then you had music. You had the Liverpool sound.
Yes.
I mentioned this.
Yes, indeed.
The Cavern in Liverpool. The stage was about the same size as your stage here.
It's not well. Yes, I mean I'm not going to denigrate my own stage, but it's not
If
massive.
not smaller.
Yeah, so about 3
So-
meters wide, 3 meters deep,
Yeah.
something like that.
So it was slightly bigger than the tea house, but hundreds of people were crammed into it. You can imagine the stench and the sweat.
Yeah.
And that's where the Mersey sound came from. So, and also with music, a lot of it was homemade. Groups would form, and a lot of them would buy their own instrument or make instruments, like the skiffle groups. So it was all organic. It was all bubbling away. Everything was bubbling away. At the same time, something else was bubbling away, and that was the identity, I think, of what was going on with it within the changing cultures of that time. Splits began to occur. You had the working class, as we called them, you know, the weekend drug takers or pillheads, because they weren't real mods.
Yeah, so the ones who are doing the
Yeah,
apprenticeships,
they would do a
working,
Saturday and a Sunday,
and then they just party the weekend, like most people.
They would always go
nowadays.
back to work on a Monday.
And this is the thing. I mean, you look at that's that idea, that nightclub idea, seems to have Well, that's become ubiquitous now, hasn't it? It's and that working in the week and then spending your money on your
Well,
drink
that
and
was
drugs and night and dancing.
You had money.
Is now that youth culture has stayed with us since then, really.
Partly.
I mean, obviously it evolves and it changes.
I think
but the
austerity,
form, the shape of it.
The 80s began to change, early 90s it really became sort of a little bit elitist and stuff like that. But yeah, but also within that change, something sort of happened with British industry. And I can't quite put my finger on it.
Well, looking back as far as I can tell from this, like, what we get told is that it started just being a bit rubbish. Like Leyland not being able to make good cars anymore.
But there must have been a reason why it happened. Was it because
all the designers, Alfie, were out in Soho getting off their
no,
at the weekends? They weren't designing anything.
The designers. I know what you're saying, but the designers in Soho were miles ahead because they were designing fashion.
You see, they're
but
designing
on the
fashion
continent, because of the Marshall Plan.
Engines.
But because of the Marshall Plan, what you had in Europe, you had designers, you had engineers. Right. In this country, we began to lose engineers because of the building industry, who needed
builders.
Yeah, I don't know about it. I need to check this, but I think something was going on. And you're right.
You're saying we're building a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the massive slum clearances throughout the country. I mean, it was massive. Absolutely incredible.
So we spent all the talent and resource on rebuilding
and just slowly but surely that change, I think, must have began. It began to. You almost hit the nail on the head. We weren't turning out designers and engineers like straight after the war for a part of the 50s, and also. So I'm jumping about here. I feel like I've got hay fever. Also, growing up after the war, war films were only understanding of war.
Okay. So that's the only. No one's talking about it. I mean, you've got to assume that they were. The experiences were too harrowing to relive.
Yeah. So what you get are quite interesting films. But they're very cleansed of the actual war. I watched one the other night. It was really well made, well acted, nice photography. Sinking of the Bismarck.
Right.
You know, it was a good patriotic, bringing people together movie. Dunkirk was another one, but they were clean. There was something lacking. But there were excellent documentaries made during the war.
Right.
And one of them stars a comedian, Arthur Askey.
Oh, yes.
Where he plays a fireman. At the time when the docks were being blown to pieces, Silvertown was being blitzed by the Germans. It's an excellent film. Absolutely brilliant piece of filming. And you really do sense a fear. You really, there's something going on here, and it's brilliant. But there was another interesting one, written by Graham Greene. Went the Day Well, and it takes a typical English village at that time. Everybody pulling their hats and all that. And there's a sort of the village hierarchy.
Yeah.
A group of Nazis have infiltrated this village.
Right.
And basically have taken it over in preparation for the actual invasion of the Nazis.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of upstanding cricket club chairman of this, chairman of that, you know, that type of individual, bank manager maybe, I don't know, is a Nazi.
Right.
You know, and it's a bit like Midsummer Murders.
You're trying to work out who the Nazis.
Yeah, but it slowly unravels, and it becomes a brilliant psychological thriller. Because individually, the villagers rise up against the Germans,
Right.
and it's violent. There's a psychological violence that goes on here. There's a brilliant scene when this woman shoots a Nazi and she literally starts shaking.
Yeah, that's a good bit of realism to your filmmaking, yeah.
And you get little bits of that. Okay, there's other scenes which are clumsy and, you know, don't quite work. But in terms of the violence, it does work. The local school teacher, she is also the local magistrate, and again a bit like Midsummer Murders. She sacrifices herself when a grenade comes in to a classroom. So she jumps on the bomb, and you see the look on the kids' faces because the body's blown up. And you have another scene when these two women are shooting at the Germans, and again the same thing happens. She shoots one of the Germans and she breaks down. So it is a brilliant film.
Yeah,
And
sounds.
it ends.
Sorry, but
Yeah, it
go on.
ends with this. This guy says, "Well," talking to the camera. It's a black and white film, by the way. He's talking to the camera, and he says, "Well, went the day well?" And he said, "Nobody knows about this anyway. It's top secret."
So
It comes out quite. It comes.
you can
I mean, when I
understand why.
first saw it, again I keep on mentioning the National Film Fiesta. That's when I first see it, actually, and the brilliant debate afterwards. Absolutely brilliant debate about not just because it was made during the war, or it's coming, towards the end, but there was this sort of sense of well, that's what held the country together, was this, not just a city.
Just every village.
There was this village. There was this picturesque thatched cottage village going on. So where you have. I think it's only now, slowly, that things are being pulled together to say what actually went on. Even the so-called sing-songs down in the underground when.
Yeah.
Fucking hell, man. I mean, find out about that. I mean, that's when the Spibs were really up there, selling stockings, going down, selling sort of beating up radios, Not every night was everybody singing, roll out the barrel. They were singing, what the fuck you got there? Come on, we want to buy that, we want to buy this. So there was this criminality that brought the community together.
Well, yeah.
Low-key criminality, and it's true. There was a tremendous, in London, in Coventry, in Liverpool, there was a tremendous community pulling together, not just because of the bombs and that we're going to win, but also low-level criminality. People didn't rely simply on ration books. They relied on Jack the Butcher.
Of course. Well, this is
stocking up extra meat.
It's that sort of black marketeering. I mean, it's that sort of low-level luxury that can make a really, really bad time just a little bit more bearable because you've got a treat, and that's going to help a lot. And people can't help it. Like,
you can buy a suit.
You do your best, but it's.
But it also, that guy that I was on about.
I bet there's a few people meeting in groups of 7 here and there at the moment, Alfie.
Oh, God, of course they are.
Well, exactly. It's the same
You know,
thing.
but it's the fun of it as well.
Yeah.
And what's his name? Billy Hill, that gangster that I was on about.
Yeah.
He made a fortune out of forged documents. You know, I mean, you know, and everybody was at it. The police, doctors, nurses, you know, the whole country, the whole industry. A lot of it was relied on, you know, it's just getting a little bit extra, basically. I mean, it wasn't massive criminality.
But just
Just
it's when the government takes control, full and total control of the market. Like the market will reassert itself.
well,
like command economies
in
don't work.
other areas.
You know, so like the market will just reassert itself, and because they've shut down the main channels, it doesn't mean that people wanting to exchange things will stop. It just
I mean, go down the market here on a Sunday, which we call the Thieves' Market. It's, you know, at the back of the new Sainsbury's. Been going for about over 10 years. It's a dump. It's like the old markets after the war. But a lot of the goods are stolen. You know, there's no police. Why should there be? You know, and you know a lot of the goods are going to break down in about a week's anyway. Particularly, you know, you buy an Uber, use it 3 times and it's broke. So you can't take it back because the guy won't be there.
Yeah.
It'll be somewhere else. Last time I was down there was about 3 years ago. This guy knocking out chickens, frozen chickens. But you can only wonder.
Did you have flashbacks?
But you know, I'm sure I'm a bit rambly because it's a bit hot. But so moving into the 60s.
Yeah, no, just had a thought before we get too far
Yeah,
ahead.
go on. Yeah.
Just about, you were saying that the war films were quite sanitised. I think there's probably two thoughts about that. I mean, at that time, you're talking
Although I did
theatre
say,
and film
yeah,
censorship is quite heavy at that,
yeah.
so you're not
No,
going to
this
see
is
much
after,
on
yeah.
screen.
But there were other films, as I mentioned, like Arthur Askey, the one where he plays a fireman. There are some brilliant mini documentaries.
Yeah.
And you have a sense of the reality of it, particularly the Blitz. As I say, it wasn't this part of the world, it was way up in Silvertown. And it mentions the night, and this was in the war this film was made. It mentions that night when the River Thames was so low that the firemen could not put the fires out. You know, and that was made in the war, that was shown. So yes, there was censorship, but it was really weird censorship because it wasn't. The censorship, the actual censorship came in after the war. Funny enough.
Okay, well, I suppose
You know, so you think.
I suppose, like, because we don't. With the graphic violence is a relatively recent addition to film canon, really. I mean, the special effects from are good enough now to do it.
Blockbusters, aren't
but
they?
even just social mores have changed. I think. I mean, you look at something like Dunkirk, the more recent version. There's a lot more violent gore, not gore, but you know. So I wonder if that's part of it. Maybe it's a sensibility towards those who served after the war.
There is that,
as well as not wanting to bring
some of the good ones again that were
back.
made.
You know,
Jack Hawkins was in The Cruel Sea,
right?
where he's on a newly built cruiser, a war cruiser hunting submarines. And it's a very interesting film actually, and there's one scene where, I don't know if it's English, anyway, there's quite a large group of merchant seamen in the sea, in a circle. Under them is a submarine, and the radar has picked it up.
Right.
So Jack Hawkins, what does he do? He's there for this dilemma. He blows up the submarine with the men in the water. So you have this conscience. You know, it's a lovely little film actually about, you know, what decisions have to be made. But it's interesting as well because it goes down the ranks. You know, there are some officers who are quite pleased, but a lot of the seamen themselves are really quite disturbed about what they've witnessed on their watch. You know, so you do have the ambiguity, but you have to seek them out. And there's always a good one, you know, with the submarine. Always people trapped in the submarine. But the best one for that is Des Butt, the German. Do you know about that?
I've heard of it. Yeah, go on.
Jesus Christ, man! I actually see it in the cinema, and again, it was one of those wow moments because it's filmed in the submarine from a German perspective, and you are in that submarine with them. You are in this. If you're claustrophobic, don't go and see it.
Right.
And it's brilliant, absolutely stunning film. You don't actually see them blowing up the boats, but you know what's going on and all that. It's brilliant, and the ending, they arrive home to a hero's welcome. But the dock that they go into has been devastated by the Allies, and they're lined up ready to get their iron crosses, and the bombers come over to bomb more bombs, and most of them get wiped out.
They've gone through all that battle at sea and then get nailed when they get home.
But it's that claustrophobia. It's that, you know.
That must have been
It's
horrible.
absolutely brilliant. So, as I say, excuse me sort of wandering off on a tangent tonight, because there
That's
was
what
other
we're here
things.
for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And like that period after the war was confusing, ambiguous, but we had our own industries, and maybe now what you mentioned, we couldn't keep up because Europe had the Marshall Plan, had the money being poured into it, particularly Germany.
Yeah.
Even with East and West Germany, West Germany come back like a bomb, fast. Mostly because, dare I put my foot in it, a lot of the German engineers, managers under the Nazi regime were still about. You could pull them in. So they had this expertise. Even though it was a state industry, but they knew how to manage. They knew exactly what they were doing on. Maybe that was part of it. And lots of money being poured in. But something happened here where the splits occurred in youth culture, I think, as well. And what came out of that with the individualism, with the a decline of the trade union movement. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. The miners' strike.
That's quite a jump.
Which, at the time, I sensed there was something not right about that strike. Arthur Scargill called a miners' strike at Easter. A miners' strike, energy, coal. The government had set a simple trap and he walked into it. Right, they'd stockpiled everything and set Scargill a trap, and he walked into it, and he didn't give a fuck. I've maintained this. He was very charismatic. He was incredibly charismatic speaker, and he spoke the language of the coalfields, made it even more damaging. Now, I got invited to a miners', it wasn't a conference, gathering in one of the big halls just opposite Westminster, in the middle of the miners' strike. And I was with this friend of mine, Bob Colnart. He's been down here a few times. Walked in, and the atmosphere was tinged. It was amazing, absolutely electrifying. There was miners, you know, those lovely miners' banners and, you know, beautiful relics. You know, there they were, and there was all these men, all men, all there, and there were speakers. It was very, very passionate. But in came Scargill, and this horrendous cheer went up. It could have almost lifted the roof.
Right.
And he was with his bodyguard.
He was a beloved leader.
Yeah, and I just felt incredibly uncomfortable.
Right.
I could not support Scargill because there was something wrong about his love of the hero worship, what he was doing to the coal, you know, the coal industry, to the villages in particular, and I hated him for that. You know, that same man is now living in the Barbican.
Really?
Yeah, still alive, still in the Barbican, picks up a whopping great pension, and his flat in one of the wealthiest parts of the Barbican, you know, the big, is paid for out of the funds, what is left of the National Union of Coal Miners.
That's fascinating, because like to the side, like she
And
gets,
it was, but what turned me against it was his Messiah image.
well, this is the thing, and it's funny really, because I mean she gets a lot of stick for that, but those who love her, Thatcher, she gets a sort of similar sort of love in that kind of way from those who love her. And she got a lot of stick. You know, this was some terrible thing. You know, and like I'm from North, you know, and everyone hates it.
I mean, it's a conflict that left us a big scar.
Right.
Orgrave was horrible, but
But long term,
something else happened. I mean, as I say, I don't want to go too much into it tonight.
no, I mean, I just
But there was something about when you have a whole community being decimated, they're going to fight. Even though the industry itself was on its last legs,
oh yeah.
in reality.
This is the difficulty.
But
of the
again,
whole
what
thing,
happened,
isn't it?
nobody had the foresight. Funny enough, Kinnock did, because he didn't support the strike. He came out because of Labour and said, yeah, but it was so half-hearted that he got a lot of stick for it. But there was nothing to say the industry is dying. There's these vast communities with a tremendous amount of pride and skill.
That was the thing she got wrong.
What shall we put in its place?
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny, right? Looking back, every single person in the north of England should be eternally grateful to Margaret Thatcher. For 2 generations ago, you'd spend all your time down a mine getting emphysema and die at 40.
Yeah.
Now everyone's working in air-conditioned offices and delight and plenty of money. That's what's replaced it. Now, at the time, they didn't think about that and put
Maybe
it in.
this
And a lot
yeah.
of it is government jobs as well. That's the other thing. You've
Yeah,
got a
but
lot of
maybe that
government
goes
jobs which
back
is
to
still
the
pointing
thing
at
about when
pushing
we
it up,
started
like
losing our
housing
industrial
association
base.
jobs called, you know,
Yeah. what do you put in its place?
But yeah, they hadn't thought of that.
Yeah,
That properly. And the communities
now,
are
I'll tell you
decimated
something.
and troubled.
Roz was a good friend of not just Roz. There was a whole group of people, women, in the south, and Roz was part of that group, who were feeding the miners. They were, because they were starving.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't well handled.
But if you mentioned Arthur Scargill to those women, they'd castrate you.
They weren't about the leader; they were about the men.
Yeah.
Some good sense there.
And they would come down to Oval House. Some of these women work in the kitchen at night to prepare food for the driver. The women played a very powerful role in that strike. You never hear of it, it's always the masculine men, but they played a role, and they were more aware of the consequences of the strike, of what was going to happen afterwards, because there was nothing. When I was in the 70s, wasn't it? I actually did a placement in a coal mining village, Ipstock, in Leicestershire. I was there for about 4 weeks, and I actually went down the face of a mine a couple of times. It was brilliant, but it was a great experience, and the communities were great, but it was absolutely male dominated. And I was with a friend of mine, Courtney Tulloch, who a Jamaican poet, dreads. You had me like this in this mining village, and it was great, but it was all male dominated. Everything. So you had the working man's club. Women weren't allowed in.
Oh no, I mean that was part
of
the course.
So there was this sort of deeply ingrained conservatism within those
small C and cultural.
Yeah. So I think what I'm struggling with, no, I'm not struggling, I've had really time to grasp it, is all those little threads of the fabric that was going on. I know a hell of a lot about the music, I know a hell of a lot about the mods, I know about the fashion industry, I know about that whole culture in southern England, and around fashion, TV, all those wonderful experimentation dramas coming along, but the actual fabric that was slowly coming apart, it's a bit like Bob Dylan in that concert up north. No, I said that up north. When after the break of the first time, when he was doing his folk singing, it was a folk concert. Have you seen it? He came out with the electronic
guitar, and they ate
broke.
it.
Judas. And when somebody shouted out Judas, it was the Birds, wasn't it? The group. He turned around and said, "Turn it up," and they blasted. And I think that one little thing is what was going on. You had the old England, in terms of the folk, the beatniks and all that, who loved Bob Dylan's early protest songs, and they were brilliant. But even he admits that he doesn't know where they came from in his head. I mean, the times are changing.
Yeah.
Black activists, even there, say that should have been written by a black person. It was written by Bob Dylan. But he admits that it was images. But so that crack, even there, was you could use that little image and begin to sort of, as a microscope, and look at it. And
a real old world and a real new world, first time youth culture. It was what you're saying, the village with the movie with the old village hierarchy and that vision of England against the city and how it's.
Well, I say if you look at We Are the Lambeth Boys, you can see the split going on there.
Yeah.
all the young men are in work, apart from a couple of them. All the girls are in work, and so you have this. You can look at that. But across the river, something else was developing. As I keep on saying, the individualism, the arts student movement at that time was pretty powerful in terms of fashion, in terms of look, in terms of style, where for that moment in time, London, swinging London, did rule the world. Foreigners came to London to be seen, to be photographed in these various sort of so-called swinging London places. But then swinging London slowly got incorporated into Big Ben, the Tower Bridge.
That's the tourist aspect, isn't it?
Yeah,
of course. But there's also selling the city. Like once you've got a commodity like that, it's going to get, especially when it's visually beautiful with all the fashion stuff, and it's going to get associated with the landmarks of where it's from, because that's again, they are visually stunning, and you put those visually stunning things together, it's going to be the marketing man is getting involved at some point.
Also, a big addition was the British Museum was free. All the art galleries were free. So people, like they are, well, they're not now, you have to fucking phone up. All the major exhibitions were free. I was on the committee at the Festival Hall under the crazy days of the GLC. We did some good work in terms of the arts. It was the GLC that opened up the South Bank free, and God, the resistance that we had from the from the South Bank committee. I mean, they threw up every single idiotic argument you could think of. If you open the doors at the festival hall, you were letting drug addicts, you were letting literally the wrong type of people. It was closed most of the time.
Yeah.
It was only open at 6 in the evening when there's a concert on. So when we forced it through, sorry pals, you're going to open. Nothing happened. All these mythical elements never showed up.
No, there's a surprise.
They never showed up. And as I said the other day as well, in terms of architecture, that was built at the time of the Festival of Britain. So now, when you look at the Festival Hall, the part that looks over the Thames, so my nose is blocked, folks. When you look across at the Thames, people say, oh, this is the entrance. It's not, it's at the side. That beautiful staircase. And it should go back, that should be the entrance. And I mean, I hate the South Bank now. To be honest, I loathe it.
It's all right to walk down.
I just don't like that. It's just too much.
It's always my
I like
favourite place for
Alan
tourists.
Alan has discovered the embankment.
Yeah.
On the north. That's where it's, peace and quiet.
Oh yes, certainly.
It's age, my friend.
It's a much better walk for peace and
quiet.
And
it's nice. You can look across at the South Bank, and you can see it's a mess. It's a sort of, which is okay.
Well, I mean, let's not get into the 70s architecture involved, because there might be a really great staircase,
discovered
the National Theatre.
Now we discovered the North Bank. You can discover all these little gardens and little parks. You can discover at Charing Cross Bridge Station, where the bandstand is. Just a bit further on is a very weird structure. It's like a stone gate. That used to be where the River Thames came up. So a little bit of psychogeography. Yeah, well, so that's it basically. It's a wandering. I'm trying to get my head around. It is about a decline. It is about a decline that people knew. But we're not very good at putting something in its place.
Yeah, well, it's interesting,
Like-
because just.
No, I was going to mention about today's young people.
Oh, okay.
You know, the ones that I've been working with. I don't anymore. I walked out in disgust. They don't have much choice.
Right.
They haven't done for a long time. And I remember sitting down with a group of them in college, having a sort of discussion about ambition and what's on offer. All of them said, we've got ambition, but none of us want to stack shelves in Tesco's or work in, these other £8 an hour jobs. They're not even apprenticeships, right? We had multiple choices about where to go in my generation. If you want to get a job, you'll get a job. If you want to get money, you'll get a job. If you wanted to get a trade, you'll get an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
But now, that's not there at all. They
I
can't.
mean, that's a really long conversation that we shouldn't get into too deeply.
Yeah,
at this,
I mean,
at
I
the
know
end.
them. I mean, I've been with them.
Yeah.
I've helped them to do their application forms. At Tesco's on a Saturday fucking morning. Come on, man. Where have we gone wrong with that generation? There's a whole generation that we've lost who are intelligent, articulate.
So I see hope there.
You know, they haven't. You know, they've got skills.
Yeah, but
Unfortunately,
yes, but they're told that there's no opportunity. When in actual fact, with the birth of the internet, if young people were taught more entrepreneurial skill at school, you can.
Well, they do,
nowadays, you
but-
can make something of yourself.
yeah, but there's only
from
so
nothing
much.
with
There's only
just a
yeah,
computer.
in terms of the tech industries. Again,
No, but even
there
in
is a very
trade,
class
in
difference here. You
trading,
can. I mean,
You might not be
unfortunately,
programming something. But
No,
you can, but the fact
stuff is there.
You can
but
sell things around the
yeah,
world from the comfort
people
of your own
do,
bedroom.
yeah, but it's such a small amount of young people who can do that. Not every human being is
Oh yeah.
trained up, is even wired
You're
up for that.
bloody better with
You
the
know, they
bloody
want
internet than I am.
a steady. Yeah, well, oh yeah, 10 times better than me. But you know, they want a steady job and a steady life. They don't want a revolution. You know, they just want probably what my parents wanted.
Yeah,
You know.
all these steady jobs
So-
that you have nowadays are jobs
even
pushing
in the
paper around.
even in the tech industries now, oh boy, start looking at them and where they are. A lot of
we
them
need
are
to-
moving out from the city to fucking Frankfurt. Okay,
sorry, I mean, there's
but
a bit of it
what I'm
here,
saying
but we
is that
don't- we've
you
not
have
got
a
our own-
working class group of people
Silicon Valley, yeah.
who are not working class anymore because that's gone.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'd agree with you there.
You have an angry, articulate. I mean, they do some amazing exhibition work. These young people I was working with, absolutely incredible, actually. And it's all open. When they do an exhibition, they all industries come down and see them and interview them and give them praise, and they appear in magazines and everything. Only a minority will get a job out of that. A friend of mine, Kevin Hope, God bless him, has spent a year, a bit longer, getting the Tate Modern to open up the top floor for the students that we work with. And that began to bear fruit because you were getting some fairly. A friend of mine who's been down here a couple of times, Sophia, a black woman. They were just about getting the right type of fashion design entrepreneurs to come down and talk to young people. Unfortunately, this came down.
But at the
so
same
it's
time,
there.
I'm not being funny.
Yeah,
right?
it's there.
There
right?
are no jobs in fashion design because everybody wants to do it.
No,
There's
no.
only
What
a
I'm saying
small
is these are
number
young
of that
people.
can
No,
do
no.
it.
What I'm saying. Remember what I said about
there's not that many
how it all.
clothes.
No, remember what I was saying about what made swing in London. It
Yeah.
was those areas.
Yeah,
Right,
well,
and these are working
This is a
class
small
kids. Yeah,
group.
these are working class kids.
Yeah.
Right, they could, and because the way that college used to work, not anymore because it can't, because of the lockdown. It would have fed through. It would have fed through. Something might have come up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
This is
at the moment, I mean, there was a young woman. It was on one of these chat shows, and they don't sit on their ass doing nothing. These young people,
No, of course not.
they're applying for jobs, right? Hundreds of jobs a week. I wouldn't even apply for fucking 10. It's not there. Something has gone wrong. Again, it's the non-planning. It's the non-understanding. I mean, this government won't do it. Maybe another Conservative government, when they get their heads together, might be able to do something. But it's not just their fault anyway. All this happened years ago. The breaking up of working class communities. So can we do this next week?
Yeah, because I was
yeah,
thinking
my
that
head.
when we started it,
Yeah.
I was like, this
Yeah.
might be a really good one for another chat.
Yeah, we'll
Just
go longer.
on-
I'll do more research on this, and we'll go into it a bit more deeper.
Just on what we were talking about earlier, though, if I can, what were we saying?
Yeah,
Cultural industry. This is it. You were saying, what is it? And there's all these threads, and you're right. And I think this is why we're having these conversations to try and work out what these threads are in that post-war period. But I put it to you, because I don't know. Was it perhaps this Soho mod, individualist, swinging London? Was that the birth of the cultural industries as a real thing?
Yeah.
There's no industry. That's a new industry almost.
it was a new industry.
There was a bit
and
of
what
art.
yeah,
I'm sure
but
there was bits
remember
of
what I
art
said
and filmmaking,
as
but
well.
There's an actual full-on industry.
It pulled in entrepreneurs.
Well, yeah. So that's the birth
Now
of a
it
new
was
industry
a
post-war.
GLC who
With this
brought,
individualism.
who brought in the two committees that I was on, who brought in for London the idea of the cultural industries, that there was plans and everything. Livingston was just fucking, he blew it apart. I mean, God, I still want to kill him for that. But it's like now people are saying, bring back the theatre, open the theatres.
God,
Now, when I was in the 70s running Oval House, when it had an international reputation for experimentation, we didn't have money. We made the structures to get money. That was where
been the case for the art.
yeah, that was where the teamwork of me and Roz worked amazingly. I had the way to set out the structures of what needed to be done. I was hopeless at fundraising, absolutely hopeless. So Roz could interpret what funding there was, what was needed, and where we would get it. Now, for that small moment in time, Oval House did become an international place to go and to experiment. I would love to see more experimentation. I would love to see people. I mean, I had a friend of mine the other day. I said, well, let's see if we can get something together.
Well, we've had a conversation like this in the middle of
And
lockdown,
she
haven't we,
wanted,
on the state of the
and she said,
theatre.
well, how much will we get? And I said, fuck all, because there ain't no money.
No, of course not.
We have to do something.
Arts.
We have to do
there is
something.
no money in art.
It's like going back. We had to create things. We had to involve people. We created.
And then if you're lucky, someone will like what you're doing and give you some patronage.
Yeah, and that you had to have people who could do that, and Ros was brilliant at that. I mean, when she got ill, Carnival fell apart.
You don't do the art. You don't do the art, and you don't do the theatre for the money. You do it for the need, don't you? Otherwise, you shouldn't be doing it. But yes, young people and creative industries next week. Let's do that.
Yeah, can you make a note of that?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was at the Arts Council when it was in Piccadilly.
Yeah.
And I got really enthusiastic when they said that they're going to set up this new committee, new writing. And I went, bing! Fantastic. We're looking for the new Samuel Beckett.
Fantastic. Yeah.
You know, that's what we need. Brilliant. At last, they're getting it. Was it be fucked? It was new writers who could write for Emmerdale, and I'm not joking.
All right.
You know, I mean, don't forget Samuel Beckett.
We're going to get this in next.
Yeah, Samuel Beckett is one of my favourites.
Come into a wonderful.
Right, keep that because
conflagration of my views on the state getting involved in art,
and another one, something like
Arts
Beckett.
Council experiences.
Yeah, with his use of language and everything. He was involved in the Second World War. He was involved in the French Resistance.
Yeah. You see,
ladies and gentlemen,
because we're
this
going
is
to
going
get
to be my
art by committee, and
this is going to be my
discussion
farewell
as well.
for the night. I think most of the people now involved in the cultural industries, well, they haven't really done much in life actually.
Oh, no.
Anyway, on
And
that
it's all
note,
very staid and dull at the moment. But yes,
his words,
in
not
terms
mine.
of post-war cultural change, we think what we're saying that the war had a great effect on the generation who fought it, and they really didn't want to speak about it. The spivs in the war developed into the East End gangsters in the post-war. The rebuilding of the everything that has been bombed out. Maybe stole young talent away from engineering and design and just into reconstruction, causing a little bit later maybe some of the problems in our industry, and there's a whole other conversation about cultural industries. Is that rough? Good summing up of some of those threads? I don't think I've caught them all.
I just want to talk a little bit, not now, next week, about the writers on the par with Samuel Beckett.
Yeah.
Because you know about not Alcatraz. Was it Alcatraz? No, Alcatraz. One of the big prisons. When they put on Waiting for Godot.
Oh.
Have I told you about that?
Told me this story, but I can't remember it. Was it in America?
Yeah. It was one of the most aggressive prisons, and they put on Waiting for Godot. 2,000 prisoners in a big hall, silence, near a pin drop. And when it finished, they went mad because they knew what was going on. They knew what the alienation was about. This is the power of language. Fucking mass murderers, fucking psychopaths, bank robbers. And that's the only prison, the only organisation, not prison, in the world that can actually put on Samuel Beckett performance without having to go through his estate.
That's fascinating.
It's the power of language. On that note, folks, I've been at it before this one. We were talking about Nazi Germany. Help.
So it's quite a varied day. Alfie, that was
not
great.
bad.
I enjoyed that immensely. I'll see you in a week, sir.
Yeah. Shall I take it out? Yeah.